Hello, 5th and 6th grade. We're going on to the next section in social studies, which is on page 181 in your reading books. And we're on section 10.4, which is other events during Civil War times. So we just read about the Civil War happening, and really the entire nation was caught up in the Civil War in some aspect, whether it meant that they were experiencing it in their own towns, and having to flee, whether it's they were soldiers and participating in the war, or whether it was, their lives were affected by the war that was going on. But at the same time, other things were happening in the nation while this war was going on. And so we're going to read through a few of those. I'm also going to try the whiteboard app on here today. So I'm just going to be taking some notes as we read about some of the main points that we're reading about. So we're going to give that a try. So we are on page 181, 10.4. Other events of Civil War times. Our nation gets a new motto. During the Civil War, the motto, "In God We Trust," first appeared on the United States coins. The man most responsible for the adoption of the motto was Secretary of Treasury Salmon Chase, who sent the following memo to the director of the mint at Philadelphia, one of the places where our nation's money is made. No nation can be strong except in the strength of God, or safe except in his defense. The trust of our people in God should be declared on our national coins. You will cause a device to be prepared without unnecessary delay, with a motto expressing in the fewest and tersest words possible this national recognition. The director of the mint composed several mottos, from which Chase chose, "In God We Trust." Since that time, coins issued by the United States have borne testimony to the nation's dependence on God. "In God We Trust" became the official national motto in 1956. So, unfortunately, in the last 50 to 70 years, there has been a shift in 1956, the country as a whole voted that, yes, this should be our country's motto. Life, for the most part in America, was still based off of Christian morals. But unfortunately, in the last 50 to 70 years, we have seen a decline in that. And there are people who are arguing to have "In God We Trust" taken off of the dollar bills and the coins. And so hopefully that won't happen, because this country was founded on Christian principles. This country was started because of people wanting freedom of religion, to be able to worship God in the way that they choose. And that would just be really sad if that was removed from our money, because that is the basis of our foundation here in the US. So one of the points that we learned from there, we're just going to give our whiteboard app a try here, was our nation's motto. So we start out with a new motto, and a motto is kind of like a catchphrase or something that defines whatever it is it's naming. So our country's motto is kind of what we ultimately believe in. So the national motto became "In God We Trust," and is printed on all the money and became the nation's motto in 1956. Okay, great. So we'll start there with our first point. Awesome. Actually, I might just stay in there. We'll stay in there. Okay. Learning Zoom more and more every day. So if you have coins or if you have dollar bills, you can look at them and see that they will say "In God We Trust" on them. All right, America sings new songs. Many songs either were written or became popular during the Civil War. Julia Ward Howe's "The Battle Hymn Republic" and Dan Emmett's "Dixie" are the best remembered, but there were many others. I'm sure you've heard the Battle Hymn Republic either at church A lot of times you might hear it in cartoons. This is the one, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is doing, I don't know all the words. But the chorus is glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. And so this became kind of a battle hymn, as it's called, during the Civil War time. Some were lively tunes that the soldiers sang as they marched to war. Others were quiet melodies that they sang around campfires. Many of these Civil War songs remained popular today because of their patriotic themes and distinctly American flavor. In the North, George Frederick Root wrote the Battle Cry of Freedom and nearly 30 other Civil War songs. In the South, Bonnie Blue Flag and The Yellow Rose of Texas became popular. Goober Peas, a song about Confederate soldiers passing the time by eating peanuts, helped Southerners make light of the hardships they faced during war. When Johnny Comes Marching Home and Tenting on the Old Campground were heard in the camps of both North and Southern troops. Even though war divided the nations, songs reflected the common bonds that remained between people of the North and the South. So that's a pretty important thing to remember, that although they were fighting against each other as enemies, songs were really something that unified them, that they were all experiencing this at the same time. So songs reflected the common bonds between the North and South during the war. The gospel continues to spread. Most churches in both North and South put themselves wholeheartedly into the war effort. Churches donated financial and medical aid to the cause and gave moral support to the troops. Thousands of Bibles and tracts were distributed to both Union and Confederate soldiers. Many tracts were written specifically for the soldiers. During the war, in both the North and the South, many preachers served as chaplains, which are pastors to branches of military. Church organizations devised various ways to help the people in need. After the war, churches helped to heal the wounds, rebuild the country, return citizens to peacetime work, and prepare the freed slaves for citizenship. Because war forces men to face death, it also forces them to think upon spiritual matters. In both North and South, there were many spiritual revivals during the course of the war among both civilians and soldiers. This revival was especially noted among the Southern troops, at least partly through the testimony of General Stonewall Jackson. So there was a revival in both the North and the South. During the war. Which is really amazing during this time of American against American and fighting for what they believe is right, to have this common bond and to see the gospel continuing to spread is really amazing, to see that God can work in even the toughest situations. Clara Barton founds the American Red Cross. Soon after the war began, Clara Barton, who lived from 1821 to 1912, a native of Massachusetts, went to the battlefield to nurse wounded soldiers. By 1864, she had been appointed superintendent of a division of Union nurses. Her courage and skill earned her the respect of the nation. Soldiers called her the angel of the battlefield. After the war, at President Lincoln's request, Clara Barton organized a bureau to locate missing soldiers. In 1869, Clara Barton went from Europe, where she served as a nurse on the front lines during the Franco-Prussian War. The work of the International Committee of Red Cross in Europe greatly impressed her. When she returned to the United States in 1873, she immediately began efforts to establish an American branch of the Red Cross. In 1881, Clara Barton founded the American National Red Cross. Clara Barton became its first president and served in that capacity until 1904. So Clara Barton, which I'm sure is a name you've heard before, founded the American Red Cross. And was a nurse during the war. So quite a hero, especially in a time where women were not seen as ones that typically went to work or had a career. They were most of the time just home being housewives and moms. So this is pretty amazing for her. The Pony Express speeds the mail. Now that people live all over the United States, they needed a faster way of communicating across the miles. To meet this need, some men developed a mail route between St. Joseph, Missouri and Sacramento, California, called the Pony Express. The Pony Express opened in 1860, shortly before the Civil War, and lasted only 19 months. The mail was carried by boys or young men who were small and light and willing to ride through Indian country alone. The mail carrier rode a pony as fast as he could for a 15-mile stretch. At a way station, he would switch to a fresh pony and be on his way again in less than 2 minutes. Riders covered from 75 to 100 miles a day. A letter sent by Pony Express could travel from coast to coast in 10 days. That's pretty amazing if you think of it being transferred just by boys or young men riding horses, carrying that letter from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. It's amazing. But the Pony Express was expensive. It cost $5 to send a letter. Right now, stamps cost about 47 cents, I think was the last I remembered. And it was very dangerous. Once telegraph lines linked the East to the West, there was no need for it anymore. So it was neat while it ran its course. So we have the Pony Express, and that could get mail from coast to coast in 10 days by a boy on a horse. Pretty fascinating. The railroad spans the nation. Little by little, the railroads had improved, and some people began to dream of a railroad that could connect the East with the West. Building a transcontinental, which means going across a continent, building a transcontinental railway would be a long, difficult job. The track would have to be laid across a vast prairie and plains and over rugged mountain ranges. In 1862, during the Civil War, 2 railroad companies were chosen to begin this tremendous job. Within a couple of years, the Union Pacific Company began work in Omaha, Nebraska. A railroad had already been built to Omaha from the east. The Union Pacific workers laid their tracks westward from Omaha. At the same time, the Central Pacific Company started in Sacramento, California, and began laying tracks towards the east. Thousands of people from China moved to California to help lay these tracks. Somewhere in the middle, these 2 railroad companies would meet and join to form the first transcontinental railway. My kids were asking the other day, they were watching a movie which showed San Francisco, and there was a large Asian culture in the movie they were watching. And they were saying, why is there so much Chinese stuff if it's in America? And the reasoning is because of the population that's there. California is one of the closest areas of the United States to China and Japan. And so during this time, when they were looking for workers that they could pay pretty cheap to lay this railway line from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, you had some volunteers. And so Chinese was one of them. And so people came from China, which was very populated, not a lot of job opportunities. And so they would come from China and come to San Diego and San Francisco and Sacramento, and they would join the railway business and lay tracks. And so heritage of that, families stayed even after the railroad was built. And so that's why you have such a strong and prominent Asian culture in California. Okay. Many men labored many years to build this railroad. There were no stores along the way to buy supplies and food. As far as the new tracks were finished, trains carried supplies to the workers. The workers shot buffalo for fresh meat. Summer days were hot and winter days were cold. Indians often attacked the working men. Day by day, the two sets of tracks came closer and closer to joining each other. The two railroad companies raced each other to see which company would finish the most miles of track. Finally, on May 10th, 1869, a Union Pacific locomotive traveling west met a Central Pacific locomotive traveling east at Promontory Point, Utah. One more spike would finish the job. No ordinary spike would do for such a great event. Amidst the sound of cheers and the blows of the sledgehammers, railway officials drove a gold spike into the last rail. The Transcontinental Railroad brought tremendous changes to our country. Settlers began to travel west in trains rather than in wagons, and people from the east were now able to visit people who had moved west. Farmers and businessmen from the west could send their products back east by train to sell them and order supplies to return from the east. So just like we were seeing with the North and South having a train to connect them for commerce, or ships being sent from New England to England or the South to England for products, now, because of the railway going across the United States, now you had a much faster, much more efficient way of getting goods from the West back to the East and vice versa. Goods from the East getting all the way to the South. And the railway also opened opportunity, as we saw before, for people to look for family members or to go visit family members that are in the West. And so it opened a lot more possibilities than they had before. Some questions to answer today. So in your packets on 10D, some things we're going to identify. What is our nation's motto? And before we do that, let's just fill in a couple more things on our notes here. So the last thing we had was the Pony Express. So it could get from the mail from coast to coast in 10 days by a boy or horse. And then we have Transcontinental Railway. And that was a railroad going from the east to the west. Most of it was built by Chinese immigrants. Okay. And why was this important? This allowed goods and people to move and visit the West efficiently. Okay. All right, so back to our questions. Identify what is our nation's motto? What is that catchphrase that it was used, is used, it's on all of our money, that kind of shows the values of our country. 2, identify the founder of the American Red Cross. Who is that? 3, the mail route between St. Joseph, Missouri and Sacramento, California. 4, the railroad that stretched from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific and the 2 railroad companies that worked together to connect the East and the West. So think about what that question is asking. It's actually asking a couple questions. And so you can answer those on lined paper. And lastly, how did the Transcontinental Railroad benefit the people of the East and in the West? So how did the Transcontinental Railroad benefit the people of the East? What do you think? And then what about the people of the West? How did it affect their lives? Did it open them up to the possibility of new products being able to be brought into their land, or sending out their products and having someone else buy it so that they earn more money where they're at? So there's lots of different things that you could write when it comes to Think 5. Do your best on those. I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.